Hello everyone, welcome and Feàrna, and it's great to have such an amazing turnout, and we're really looking forward to sharing this work with you. I think we had 44 people signed up, and with ourselves I think over 50, but hopefully people start to trickle through. I'm not sure how many we have already, but fantastic to see the range of faces and some names I recognise, and lots of kind of new faces as well. So that's really exciting. So my role in Coastal Cultures Islands project is as project manager, and I work closely and collaboratively with Deirdre McKenna, who you'll meet shortly, who is the engagement manager for the project. And Deirdre will be facilitating most of the event, including the presentations and discussions. I'll give you a wee bit of background about the project and also about charts, because some of you may not know much about charts. Some of you might be members, some of you may have had some contact, but I'll just kind of talk a wee bit about that and the context for these projects. So yeah, just to introduce Charts. So Charts is a network. Charts stands for Culture, Heritage and Arts, Argyll and the Isles, and it's an organisation with charitable status, set up to support and represent the cultural sector across Argyll and Bute. Charts works strategically with Argyll and Bute Council and other partners to build capacity and confidence of the arts, heritage and cultural organisations and individuals, and currently has over 600 members, with 1/3 of the membership based on the 23 inhabited islands of Argyll. So it's a very, sort of spread out geography. Most of the Charts team work digitally for, obvious reasons, and the reach is wide. So for more information on Charts, you can connect to the website. I think Kirsten's going to put a link in the chat, and also we've got a recent annual report for 2023, which shows the kind of range of projects that Charts does. So that's a really good one to have a look at. So this particular project, Coastal Cultures Residencies, Islands Residencies, was developed by Charts, which is the way that Charts works. It's kind of responsive, and it's almost like a cyclical, delivering, learning, sort of developing, sort of virtuous circle, as it were. So this project was developed in response to and building on previous work that Charts had done around the theme of coastal cultures, and also the learning from a project called Microclusters, Placemakers, which was delivered in 2021. This project focuses on islands, and that came out of both those previous projects as an identified gap or need or area for development. So it has enabled the 3 residencies projects, which you'll connect with shortly, to engage with communities and the unique places that they work from. The project sits within Charts in terms of wider strategic support for islands under a project called RAV. That's funded by the Scottish Government through the Islands Plan funding, and it has already supported a variety of island practitioners and organisations to date, and raised the visibility of the work that's happening on the islands. And the word Rav is a Gaelic word meaning or, and it relates to the expression Eranún Rav, which means on the same oar. And so the meaning is pulling together or working together, which is a really lovely phrase. So after a call out last summer, 3 residencies were commissioned, and they are Between the Tides, based on Tyree, led by Jack Lockhart, with Jen Skinner of Screen Argyll. Feàrna, which covers based on the Mull archipelago, led by Alice Stillman and Rhona Dougall. And Expressing an Island, which is based on Ling, and neighbouring Slate Islands, as they're called. That's led by Norman Bissell, who was working with a young artist called Lottie May. And you'll hear more about and meet those people shortly, apart from Lottie May, who's actually in Australia. But the residencies launched in July 2023, and I think it's fair to say there's been a huge amount of work and activities delivered since then. Over 400 people have engaged with the projects to date. I think it's key to mention that all the lead artists are resident in their communities, although collaborating in some cases with others within the islands or beyond, depending on project activity. So there's an investment and a continuum to the work and to the relationships and partnerships that have been developed and are developing and will continue to develop beyond the life of the project. So there's a lived understanding of the context in which all the artists are working. And each project have identified and, you know, are addressing kind of needs or gaps or specific areas of work which are unique to their communities and which you'll hear more about. So the projects are currently coming to a close at the end of this month. So this event is a really valuable opportunity to share the work, insights. Obviously, they're still kind of live projects and around the processes of these 3 very different projects. There's more detail in each of the projects on the showcase page on the Charts website, and Kirsten will share a link to that as well. I think there was a link on the Eventbrite page too. So you can find a bit more there and individual links to each project. Coastal Cultures Islands Residencies are funded by Creative Scotland and supported by Scottish Government, Argyll and Bute Council and Bòrd na Gaelic. And that's the context, the background to the projects. I'm just going to hand over now to Deirdre McKenna, Engagement Manager for Coastal Cultures Islands. I can't see her on the screen, but I know she's there, so thank you.
Here. Thanks, Mary. Thanks very much. So I'm just very briefly going to just say a couple of words about my role, which has been to work with the artists and to kind of create, take part in dialogues, link up people where possible, so that we can explore how engagement has really functioned at the heart of these, as Mary says, very, very different projects in unique places. So this has involved thinking through the different kinds of processes that each artist has undertaken, thinking through how the relationships have evolved, how the artists have been building them, how relationships may have taken off on their own. And then thinking about where the value lies in all of this work for the artists, for the people they're working with, but also for Charts as well, so that we can think about what this means for Charts going forward. So generally, just really supporting the project to grow ideas, grow confidence, fulfill its aims, and also thinking about the bigger picture and where this work might lead the individual artists and what new initiatives might be appropriate in these different places. So in a minute, I'll hand over to the artists to tell you about their different projects. But if I can ask everybody to think while you're listening, think about the questions that you have, because we have a section after the introductions of the 3 projects. We're hoping to have a really nice dialogue and hear the different questions. So at the end of each presentation, I'll ask for any practical questions if there's anything that you'd like clarification of. Then we'll have just a couple of a minutes break, but then we'll come back and I'll ask you to either just speak out your questions or perhaps write them in the chat so that we can have a discussion across the whole group. So starting us off today is the Feàrna project, which took place on Mull, and Alice Stillman and Rhona Dougall are going to introduce us to that. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you, Deirdre. Feàrna, I'm Rhona. I'm going to kick things off. And so the Feàrna residency, as Deirdre said, has been taken forward by myself and Alice, and you'll hear from Alice a wee bit later. I'm from Oban, of Gaelic heritage, a Gaelic speaker, and I've got a background in community arts. And Alice is originally from England, from Norfolk, and she's lived in various parts of the world. She's currently living in Tobermory and moved there in 2020. And she also has a background in community arts. And though both Alice and I have been working in the cultural sector in Mull, this is the first time that we've worked together. And in the first phase of the project, we were also joined by Alistair White, a researcher and singer from Mull as well. So With Feàrna, we chose to work initially and predominantly with people of Gaelic heritage. And by this, we don't mean Gaelic speakers, although some people were. We mean people who come from families who were traditionally Gaelic speakers, even if they no longer speak the language today. And they are nevertheless bearers of Gaelic cultural knowledge, Gaelic worldview. The reason we chose to do this is that we were conscious that these people often tend not to be involved in many arts and certain other community activities, which tend to be led and attended by newer residents in Mull, predominantly people of English heritage. And this pattern of participation, or lack of it, is found across the region. It's not specific to Mull, I don't think, though there are, of course, many exceptions. But it is particularly and increasingly pronounced in Mull. And so our aim with Feàrna really is towards more inclusive ways of working with more diverse groups of people. So the activity we undertook, we hosted 6 gatherings around Mull plus 1 online, and we actually have a final 8th gathering this Friday. Initially, we worked with people of Gaelic heritage, almost all people of Gaelic heritage, but latterly with more mixed groups, but still with people of Gaelic heritage in the majority. We followed up these gatherings with house calls to people's homes, because at times the work called for more informal personal meetings to build relationships and build trust. Our overarching aim was to buck this non-participation trend by investing time in relationships with people of Gaelic heritage without rushing into any high-profile events or activities, in the belief that this sort of foundational work is needed for any future work that we were to do in Mull to be properly inclusive. And we use the analogy of underground mycorrhizal networks, networks of fungi which support forest life. It's largely unseen and underground, but it determines the health and the flavour of what grows from it, what grows above. So a wee bit about our process. We had and continue to have a lot of conversations. Our first role in the project was to be willing to have open, self-reflective conversations with each other on the project themes, which can often be a bit uncomfortable, but which we could do because we had built up trust and understanding between us, and also because we have a commitment to an ongoing relationship with this work. So these weren't one-offs that we had to get right first time, but conversations that we could return to and revise. We then had to theorise and design ways of working which would be more culturally appropriate and more inclusive before then testing them out. You could say this was exploring a more indigenised way of working. And it worked well for us to have someone on the inside and someone on the outside of Gaelic culture in doing this, because we could look at it from both sides. So we co-hosted the gatherings, with Alice taking a bit of a backseat initially. Invitations were done on an individual and family basis using personal connections. We baked cakes, we sang songs, had even more conversations, did a lot of reflection. And we followed up these gatherings with house calls and even more conversations and often more cake. And in terms of the roles that people have played once they've gotten involved with Feàrna through these gatherings, it's often a role that they're already holding within their lives or within the community. We have come up with a list of terms that helped us to see some of the nuances between these different roles and the different ways people were engaging with the work. It's quite a long list, too long really to share everything just now, but just to give you 3 examples, we identified people who we termed cultural protectors. So basically people who are sensitive to the fragility of and the threat to the local Gaelic culture in Mull and who want to act to mitigate this. We also identified cultural connectors, so people who are seeking to connect with the local Gaelic culture from any background or heritage, either within oneself by reconnecting with the language or culture, or connecting with it anew, or outward facing, so by bridging gaps between other cultures. And lastly, we also identified community position holders, so people who hold official, representative and or leadership positions on the island, for example, community trust trustees. So as I say, just 3 examples of a long list of terms and a diverse group of people that we worked with. And I'm going to pass on to Alice to pick things up there.
So in terms of how people that we worked with experienced it and what they got from it, many people that we worked with reported never having spoken openly about these things before, especially with somebody of the other different heritage. And there was often a sense of real relief in things being acknowledged. There was also a sense of sadness. The backdrop to this is the linguistic and cultural loss being experienced by people of Gaelic heritage, and many people are dealing with a certain level of grief regarding this. There's also a level of anxiety amongst particularly people of Gaelic heritage in exploring these issues, rooted in a fear of making anybody feel unwelcome or like they are the problem. And this particularly go against the cultural tradition of hospitality, and people were very keen to avoid this. For people in positions of power, like position holders, like fundraisers or trustees of community trusts, and we worked with a handful of these. Both people of Gaelic and English heritage recognised very quickly this pattern of non-participation and were keen to address it, and very keen to have support to explore how best to do this, because they felt at a bit of a loss, not knowing what to do. I think for us personally in our practices, I think it was about a year ago talking to Rhona that I fully clocked these patterns of non-participation or very low participation in my own work, and the marginalisation of people of Gaelic heritage on a larger scale. I realised, I think at a deeper level, I was working in a landscape where the shared national trauma of the past is still being lived and felt structurally, and I think very importantly emotionally, and shapes a lot of the relational dynamics of the present. It certainly wasn't a comfortable realisation being English to sit with, and I started looking for advice and answers as to what to do about it, which didn't get me very far because it's a very complex issue and little discussed. So I allowed myself to work with the questions, and the big question that I had was, how do I work sensitively in the Gaeltacht in this region without unintentionally participating in or recreating the same historic dynamics of displacement, silencing and erasure? And I just didn't feel I could move forward or work without looking at that. So now, coming out of the residency, I have a much deeper understanding and insight into the multiple perspectives, the preconceptions, the blind spots, the feelings and the traumatic triggers that sit in this landscape, and the dynamics and consequences of these, and especially how I as an English person fit into this, someone that's come to live and work here. I've also been able to start the process of decolonising my own practice, and I say start because friends from other parts of the world tell me it's a lifelong piece of work. And I've been really fortunate working with Rhona to experience the positive outcomes and the richness of a more Indigenous way of working. So I don't feel I'm at the end of this exploration. I think I have more questions than I started with, but they're not the same questions, and that definitely feels like progress.
And from my point of view, in terms of my own practice, this residency is the first opportunity that I've had to explore these issues with an artist of English heritage, and to share some of the working methods that I've been using in my own practice, a lot of which are rooted in Gaelic culture, and share them with someone out with the culture. When working in the cultural sector in the Gaeltacht in this region, I've often found myself as the only Gael or the only Highlander or the only Scottish person in the room. And as a result, it can be hard to bring any of this up, and you're unsure whether anyone else is aware of it. You're wary of causing discomfort, as Alice mentioned earlier. So having a collaboration partner in Alice who is so open and sensitive to these tricky issues, and someone with whom I've been able to explore how to communicate these things better with wider, diverse communities, has been really, really valuable for me.
So in terms of what's next, as we said, this has been very much about laying the foundations, and we hope to build on this, sustaining the relationships that we've built, developing new ones, and growing this network, mycorrhizal network, where we can. There are no shortcuts. It's really slow work. but it feels really relevant. There's clearly a need. We're hearing that from individuals and organisations in Mull and further afield. And towards the end of the residency, we began to work with Mull and Iona Community Trust, in particular on their Argyll Community Forest project. And we're at a very early stage with this work, but we very much hope that it will continue. We also feel there are a lot of people and organisations both in Mull and across the region that have been aware at one level or another of this issue for quite a while. There is a lot of shared experience and insight out there, we feel, and we're interested in bringing this together in some way. We're not sure how yet, but if you feel it's relevant and you're interested in being involved or having this conversation with us, then please get in touch. And we're just putting together a website now, so within a couple of weeks there should be a website online. Yeah. That's us.
Great, thank you very much, Rhona and Alice. That was really comprehensive description of your work in a very short amount of time. And thank you for introducing aspects which I think you've described clearly were absolutely fundamental parts of your practice, but also I think everybody here will recognise as massively important aspects to negotiate in every part of collaborative practice. I said that if anybody has any questions about anything practical that you'd like to ask Rhona and Alice just now about the work that they did, please do. But if you've got other questions for discussion, please note them and I'll ask you to share those later. So speak now if there's anything you'd like to ask. I'm just clicking through my screen to make sure I'm not missing somebody with their hands up. Great. Okay, thanks everybody. Okay, well if I can ask our second collaborators to present, Jack Lockhart and Jen Skinner, who are going to tell us about the work that they've been doing from the Isle of Tiree over the last few months.
Unmute myself. Thanks, Deirdre. I'm just going to share my screen for this. Hopefully you can all see this coming up.
And I'll just say hi here. I'm Jen Skinner. So I'm the program manager at Screen Argyll, and I've been helping Jack, but he's the lead artist on this project. So he's going to be the main person speaking for you just now. Yeah, so hi everyone, my name's Jack Lockhart, and along with Jen, we and some others, we run Screen Argyll from Tiree, doing mainly film stuff across Argyll and the Isles, but also we've both got a background in art and visual art stuff, so there's a kind of a overlap between art and film. And it was great to work on this project because it allowed us to do more of the arts rather than just the film stuff. So I'm going to read from a script. Hopefully it comes across okay. There's lots of pictures to look at as well. And I'll tell you about our project. So our project Between the Tides took place on the Isle of Tiree. The project was an exploration of the tides, the coastal landscape, the high and low water marks and rock pools on the beaches of Tiree. There are opportunities for people to participate in workshops and activities where they shared stories about the tides and how they affect our lives. I spent a lot of time exploring Tiree's coastline, collecting video footage of tides coming and going and making time-lapse footage of the tides in locations around the island. I also made large drawings in the sand using rakes and responding to the patterns made by the tides. Results from the project, including, for want of a better word, my videography and the work of participants have been edited together to create a film about Tiree's tides and how they affect our lives. Early in the project, a great opportunity was offered to us to use a space at the Heinisch Centre in Tiree. The Heinisch Centre was the base for the building of and the shore station for the Skerryvore Lighthouse. It's an amazing corner of Tiree. The Heinisch Centre at the moment is in a process of transition, and a space that was previously used for an exhibition about the Treshnish Isles was available for us to use for the period of this project. We turned the space into a base for the project, including a screening room for films,
a workshop space, which is a bit spartan there, it's a bit fuller now, and a foyer space, which we used as a box office and a space to welcome people and provide hot and cold drinks. Hainish is an amazing and unique place. Its buildings are unlike any other buildings on Tiree. Being able to base all the events at Hainish allowed us to explore the Hainish Centre and its surroundings and see it in a new way. Participants who came along to workshop events and screenings enjoyed using a new space, a rare treat on Tiree, where public spaces are limited. It also enabled us to deliver a 6-month programme of films and activities at Hainish across all audiences, including establishing a weekly film club through Interfilm for young people. But over the course of the project, we hosted 8 workshops and 3 screenings, which were all about the tides and the coastlines. We put up some nets in the foyer of the space with questions on the theme. Participants were invited to respond to the questions and add notes to the nets, as well as photographs of themselves. This was useful in getting people to think about the theme of the project and to build up a record of the different events and attendees. While I was the lead artist in the project, I was also working with Jen to plan and deliver the project, and invited our extended team of Alistair Satchell, Jim Parkin and Brodie Sim to get involved in helping us deliver it. Alistair created a podcast for the project, which explored the sounds and names of the tidal coasts in both Gaelic and English. Alistair makes films and podcasts and is based on the Isle of Mull. The podcast he made for our project is available to listen to on our website. You can find it there, or via his What We Do in the Winter podcast channels, which you may know of, and other places as well, I think the usual places for podcasts. And also we had Jim Parkin came along, and he brought his amazing screen machine project to Tiree, and he helped people to make an amazing plasticine painting of rockpool life and life forms. All the participatory workshops took place over 2 weekends, one during the summer holidays and one at the start of October. And it turns out that the 2 weekends engaged with quite different groups of people. During the summer holidays, many of the participants were visitors to the island. We had multi-generational family groups working together on beach activities, beach art activities, and we also had animation activities running from the workshop space. Having this space really helped us to host the events and extend hospitality to the visitors, which was kind of seemed like became a big part of what we did of the project, was hosting and being hospitable to people and welcoming people into this space that we have the use of. We had fun activities and events happening on the beaches while beginning to collect stories about the tides. In the October workshops, there were less holidaymakers or visitors to the island and more local community. And that's when we had Alistair and Jim's sessions. They'd run during the early October weekend, and they were offered different activities designed to appeal to different groups. Jim's rock pool scene was something that whole families could engage with, while Alistair's audio recording and podcast making session appealed more to adults. I ran sessions based on drawing on the beaches, where participants made portraits by drawing in the sand and using seaweed from the beach. These drawings were then animated and brought to life by participants who told their stories about the tides. As part of both weekend events, we had film screenings with films for different groups, including family films, Gaelic language films, and documentary films for a more grown-up audience, including 5 Children in It, Oran Namara, and The Silence of the Tides. We also had a visit from the local Coast Guard team, who gave a talk on the work that they do and about being safe on the coastline and safe from the tides. Also, as part of this event, we had artist Brodie Sim collecting feedback, and she was able to engage in conversation with participants and record some very valuable feedback on all the activities. All of these activities were designed to be fun, accessible and inclusive, and designed to bring people together using a range of art activities and film activities. Opportunities like this are all the more important since COVID, as we do our bit to reconnect people in a way that has many benefits, including health and well-being. The activities offered in this project are a part of that, and we are successful in engaging with different types of people, from visitors to local families and more. All participants had a story to tell about the tides and how they affect their lives. In addition to my work as a visual artist or filmmaker, I also created marketing for all the events, documenting the events with photo and video, planning the workshops, liaising with the other artists, and working closely with Jen to program films for the screening events. We had to set up the space for all the events, including the screening kits, and I was a projectionist for those screenings. I was also a workshop leader and an interviewer, and other work also included project planning and creating a method of collecting evaluation, and also working with Mary and Deirdre to ensure that the project had valuable outcomes. The project itself was affected by the tides. As workshops were taking place on beaches, we needed to find good times when the tide was out enough for us to have a place to work. We also needed to be mindful of any risks that an incoming tide might present to any participants. While I was collecting the other footage for the film, including video and time-lapse footage, I had to plan around the tides using tide tables, while also considering the position of the sun to ensure for the best results for a time-lapse using a photographer's ephemeris. Between the Tides wasn't the first time that we'd offered filmmaking, animation and art workshops in Tiree. In programming these activities, we had a pretty good idea of who would definitely sign up for activities and also who the maybe sign-ups would be. But we wanted to build on the work that the community has previously been engaged with. We feel like we've built up a good reputation for hosting quality art events, and bringing back Alistair and Jim to Tiree was a good way to strengthen the appeal to participants, as they're a part of our strong track record of delivering engaging events on the island and in the region. We knew that participants would expect fun social activities where they'd learn and develop creative skills. Our long-term aims with Screen Argyll are to build an audience and community that regularly engages with creative cultural opportunities and makes the most of these opportunities to learn new skills, build confident individuals, and strengthen community. Given the current post-COVID situation, those aims are now more challenging and perhaps more important. Our expectation at the outset of the project was to offer pop-up workshops in the community hall and on the beaches, but the opportunity to have a base for the project at the Heinisch Centre gave us an unforeseen opportunity to offer the community a new creative space, and also to see the Heinisch Centre and its spaces in a new way. This became a really important part of the project, and participants expressed this to us through feedback. And this a few of the quotes that we received from the participants. Having a dedicated space makes it feel much more stable, like you know you're welcomed and you know stuff like this can continue. It feels promising. It's nice exploring Heinisch. It's not somewhere we would normally go. Having these events gives a chance for kids on Tiree to explore different things they wouldn't get to do normally and introduce different ways of thinking. It means all the value in the world to have these things brought to your doorstep. It's one of the things that you need living here. It fills up your cup, as it were. As an older person living on my own, it's really valuable to have these creative opportunities that I can come to on my own and feel part of something. You're really changing young people's lives with these activities. They take part in things that not only do they have fun and enjoy, but they can have a huge effect on their future. It can influence their pathways in life enormously. So those quotes were collected by Brodie Sim through conversations in the second weekend of events. We'd originally tried in the first weekend of events to use to collect some feedback, but the initial attempts were less successful. We're relying on participants completing an online questionnaire accessible via a QR code on a postcard, and people simply didn't complete the questionnaire as we had hoped. It took a more proactive and personal approach to get the type of feedback that would be useful to us in the future. My own work as a visual artist developed as part of being involved in this project, it allowed me the time to explore and respond to Tyree's coastal landscapes. I often walk up and down the high and low tide lines when thinking about my work or a project that I'm involved with. And Tyree is a great place for this, and it offers you space to think and reflect. But with this project, the work offered me a space for reflection and also became subject of the work. Working with video and time-lapse photography always pushes you to develop your technical ability and artistic eye. And I also enjoyed developing mark making on a large scale and interacting and creating marks and patterns in the landscape, trying out rakes and other things. It was great to experiment with and develop animation techniques. We've previously used character animator to animate puppets made from plasticine, but it was great to experiment with other materials, including the landscape itself, when we made the talking beach faces. In terms of the film, it was a mixture of my own footage and the work of the participants. My aim is to create a film using a mixture of techniques to share the way I see Tyree and the landscapes, as well as telling other members of the community stories about the tides. And hopefully the film will resonate for people from Tyree and other coastal communities. As an organisation made up of artists, we really value this project, as most of our work is funded by film-specific projects. And this has enabled us to develop our own ideas and engage directly with our own landscape and community. Another great outcome of this project was allowing us as an organisation to work together in person and face-to-face with participants, rather than working together and delivering via Zoom like this or online, which is often the case due to both our locations and COVID, etc. We're going to be having a launch event for the film this weekend in our space at the Heinisch Centre, and we're going to then also share the film on our streaming platform, which you can access via our Screen Argyll website. It's called Stream Screen Argyll. And then we'll also offer out the film to our network of community cinemas that we've got links with across Argyll and the Isles. This will be part of a programme of short films made by myself and other artist filmmakers on the theme Sea, the Coasts and the Tides. And the programme will also be accompanied by some still images to both help promote the film and be a memento of the project. For Screen Argyll, this project was a great way to continue the work that we offer to Tyree, and it's given us a brilliant opportunity to work in a dedicated space for the work that we do and see how this can change and improve how we work with the community. The Heinisch Centre became a partner in the project that we'd not envisaged, and hopefully we can continue to develop this partnership in some way in the future, perhaps focusing next time on the unique heritage of Heinisch itself. Our time in the space at Heinisch ends at the end of this month, but we have a new space available to us in a few months in Crossapole in Tyree. The local development trust are close to finishing 4 new business units, and we've secured the use of one of these and have set up a new organisation to create an art space. And we're looking forward to putting our learning from our time at the Heinisch Centre with this project to use in another dedicated art space. This time the space will be warmer, more central to Tyree, and with better facilities. And that's a photo I took about half an hour before the meeting started, so you can stay hard at work there, and the snow is on the ground, a rare treat for Tyree. And that's the end of my presentation.
Super. Thank you very much, Jack and Jen. And what a lovely way to end your presentation, to see that image of your new space. That's really exciting. We must all visit.
Yeah, we are very excited. I mean, the Heinisch space was great, but it was cold, and the toilets were a 5-minute walk away in another museum. So it's been and it was a brilliant space to work in, but it's going to be nice to have somewhere that's warm and with the loos.
Yeah, Heinisch is really magical, and you'll see it if you come for the film festival in September. But you had to use a head torch to go to the toilet, and it was quite cold, and it was yeah. So it will be great to have a proper space.
You just grounded working in Argyll very, very well there, Jen. Great stuff, and I thought it was just amazing to hear you say that that the work, the feedback that you got and the dialogues that you had demonstrated that your work is positively affecting the pathways of young people, the pathways that they feel are possible for them. That's really exciting as well. That's amazing.
And
Great.
it was so brilliant to have this like post-COVID, because we are definitely still coming out of post-COVID, re-engaging with the same amount of people that we were before. So it was really lovely to have this focus and this energy to do that. So it was good.
Time to do it.
And another thought that I was preoccupied with when you were talking was just about, I think, this kind of really beautiful opportunity that you made for people to engage with the elements of their place through the tide and the light and the movement of the sun. And I think that our next speaker, Nori Bissell, is going to, I think, be talking to us about some similar strands as well. So thanks very much to Jack and Jen. Just before we start with Nori, sorry, my apologies. Does anybody have any just very practical questions for Jen and Jack on anything that was mentioned there? Okie doke, I'm just clicking through to see if there's any hands up. That's great. Okay, as I said, please do make notes and think about the questions you'd like to exchange when we move on to our dialogue session afterwards. But Nori, if we could ask you now to tell us about the work that you've been doing on a number of islands in Argyll.
I just thanked the charts and the funders for this opportunity. When Jack was talking there about outside toilets in Hynish on Tyree, it took me back to early where I grew up in Glasgow many years ago, and where that was not uncommon. But the project is called Expressing an Island, and it took place on the islands of Ling, Seal, Kerrera and Lismore. Next slide, please. As the lead artist, I provided 5 free writing workshops on Ling and 2 each on the other 3 islands, 11 workshops in all. They were called Writing an Island. And a young professional artist, Lottie May, provided 11 free craft workshops on the same islands on lino printing and other ways of printing. And in this next slide, you can see Lottie in Colourpool Hall, and she's showing off some Christmas cards that were made by the crafters on that particular workshop. We also had 2 geology and poetry free workshops on Ling by Emeritus Professor of Geology, Pat Corbett, who previously worked at Heriot Watt University in Edinburgh. And he is also the Assistant Director of the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics. And you can see him and a group of people participating in the workshop at the entrance to one of the slate quarries here in Colourpool on the Isle of Ling. We also had a funded slate mosaic workshop led by artist and archaeologist Dougall McInnes, whom I've known for many years. He previously was a principal teacher of art, and he has been undertaking archaeology on Ling with a team of field archaeologists. And you can see some of the folk making slate mosaics in that particular photograph. Next slide, please. So 4 of the workshops were also partly filmed by filmmaker Glenda Rome, who hails from Portobello, for a crowd-funded documentary film, Expressing the Earth, which I'll mention a bit more about later. Almost all the Ling workshops were held in Colourpool Village Hall on the west coast of Ling. The Seal workshops were held in Seal Island Hall. The Kerrera ones in their brand new community hub, the Old School, and the Lismore ones in either Lismore Public Hall or Lismore Gaelic Heritage Centre. We also held some of the creative writing exercises outdoors and botanicals and seaweed for some of Lottie's workshops were collected around Cullerpool by those taking part. Participants in some of the workshops were also shown the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics research and resource base with its library and archive at 52 Cullerpool Village on Ling. And you can see that in the next slide. It aims to offer short courses and residencies in geopoetics and writing in the years to come. The 3-year workshops were open to everyone, and those who took part were aged from 7, as young as 7, to as high as 80, and women were a majority of those attending. Next slide, please. Regarding the impact of the project, as lead artist, I wrote the application to fund all the events, contacted the workshop providers and the community leaders I knew in the other islands, planned the programme and publicised them all, as did Lottie, mostly on Facebook and on the Charts website. I worked closely with Mary, Deirdre and Kirsten from Charts. The main aim of the project was to inspire creative work by writers, crafters and other artists, and to encourage, strengthen and sustain connections between them on Ling and the other islands. I had aimed to encourage articles, poems and artwork to be submitted to the Ling newsletter, and that actually occurred, with 5 poems, an article, 2 prose pieces and some artwork in the latest issue, which just came out recently. Our lead contacts are also interested in starting up their own island newsletters on Kerrera and Lismore, and in reviving the Seal one. There were 2 positive articles also in the Oban Times about our project, which brought it to a wider audience. And there will also be a special print issue of Stravaig, the journal of poems, prose and images of Ling and the other islands, which will showcase this project expressing an island. Some crafters even sold their work at Christmas fairs on Ling and Seal. Next slide, please. The feedback from participants was very positive on evaluation sheets and orally. Several of them said they gained more confidence in their work, they wrote and created more, and were interested in continuing the connections that they had made in the course of the project. The crafters on Ling already had a group known as the 12 Dancing Pigeons, and some artists in the group would also like to organise studio weekends in Cullerpool Hall, where they could work on their drawings and paintings. I think one of them is with us tonight. The Seal Scribblers WhatsApp group was set up after one of the first writing workshops, and has since become known as Slate Scribblers, to include Ling and Seal and Easdale. Some of the Kerrera writers may start attending the writers group in the Rockfield Centre in Oban. One of them actually came from there, from the Oban area to Kerrera at one of the workshops. We've also set up Expressing an Island and Creative Islands Network Facebook pages. And I would say that the project has made a big difference for geopoetics on the 5 islands, since I gave presentations about what it is as a wide transdisciplinary concept and creative practice with an international following. There was a lot of interest amongst writers in geopoetics and in the resource and research base I have created in Cullerpool Conservation Village. This led to 4 new members joining the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics on Seal and the Oban area, and 2 new members on Ling. Regarding my own practice, the project made me write more, since I always joined in the writing tasks which I set for others. I wrote many more haiku than normally, and also some longer poems and short imaginative prose pieces. I prepared PowerPoint presentations for each workshop, which varied according to the places which I asked the participants to write about. I also organised the workshops and publicised them on Facebook and on the Chart's website. One of the learning outcomes for me in this process was that I underestimated the amount of admin all these workshops would involve, but publicising so many workshops on social media, and no time and funding for that in the future. Finally, looking to next steps, we're holding a discussion for writers, artists and crafters about the next steps in developing Creative Island networks on Sunday the 28th of January from 1:30 to 3:30 in Cullicle Hall in Ling. We aim to hold regular walks in Ling and Seal, followed by creative writing and artwork. We also aim to organise studio weekends in Ling to create new work by artists and to create a travelling exhibition of artwork and writing, and we recognise that this will require expenditure on display materials to make this possible. We would also like to hold launches with readings of the special print issue of Stravaig, the Geopoetics Journal, on Ling, Seal, Kerrera, Lismore and in Oban. We'll also be holding and continuing to hold Geopoetics conversations on Zoom, beginning with our first one on Thursday, the 8th of February, which is about poetry in Wales. It will continue every month or two. Our Expressing the Earth film should be ready to show by June this year. And another thing I've learned from this project is that it might be possible to have assistance with distribution from Screen Argyll, which would be of great help to the filmmaker and to Geopoetics generally. We also aim to attract more new members of the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics who will receive a free copy of Grounding a World, Essays on the Work of Kenneth White. Our websites are on the slide there, www.geopoetics.org.uk, and my own one, normanbissell.com, and be happy to answer any questions that you might have. I think that Kirsten could also put up the Instagram account of Lottie May, which would give you an idea of some of the marvellous artwork that she has produced. So thank you for listening. Happy to hear any questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Norrie. Again, another comprehensive presentation, so absolutely fascinating. Does anybody have any practical questions you'd like to ask Norrie just now? Okay, just great to hear that range of work that you've been doing, and also that to kind of get a sense of the spread, the kind of lateral spread of collaborations that you've been making with other organisations and agencies and cultural practitioners and individuals across the islands. And I think I'm right in saying that you're also working on some international development at the moment as well, which we can look forward to finding out more about in the next few months. So great stuff, and thank you very much again.
Yeah.
I think now we could just take a short break just for 3 or 4 minutes. And during that break, if I could ask you to think about the questions that you'd like to ask, or the things you'd like to discuss with our presenters, whether that's from your own location or whether that's exploring what it's like working in different areas. There's a lot of different points have been raised here. And just some of the common threads I think to think about are the commitment to exploring the characteristics of place that each of the practitioners has undertaken, and also the diversity of roles that they have played in order to achieve this work. And it would be great to hear from everybody here about your own experiences and perhaps some of the challenges that you're encountering, and perhaps some of the initiatives that might help with making progress. I think we'll just start our next section of our webinar now. So if you would like to drop your question into the chat, please do so, or please just ask. Please just speak out or raise your hands.
I was just wondering, Norrie, if your international adventure was going to Australia to do some more collaborating with this young artist. I can't hear you, sorry. You have to unmute.
Got you.
Sorry.
It's a great idea, but Lottie's on the move in Australia. It would be even hard to track her down there. But no, the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics is part of an international institute of geopoetics, which was founded as far back as 1989 by Kenneth White, a Scottish poet, thinker, who lived most of his life in France. So they have there is a base there in Brittany in France for the International Institute. The other interesting development, it just has happened in the run up to Christmas, is that there's a new group of a new geopoetics group in the island of Réunion in the Indian Ocean, and they've just started up lots of things on Facebook. They've got a Kenneth White page, they've got a Réunion page, and I'm in daily contact now with a chap there who's promoting all this on this tiny island in the Indian Ocean. It might be a tiny island, but it's actually got about nearly 1 million population, I found out, to my surprise. So that could be another interesting international collaboration. We do have members of the Scottish Centre in England, Wales, in France, in Canada, USA, Poland, Germany. It's quite an international membership that we now have. So that answers your question, Jack.
It sounds good.
Norrie, can I just ask you to say a couple of words of how you actually manage the membership, like through a database, or do you have?
Yes, we have a treasurer, Dave Francis, who has a membership. Our membership is, in the last few years, is, I think, at least doubled to almost 200 members, and as I said, in different countries. We've got over 20 members in England now, and we've had some events in England recently, and there's another one coming up in September with the Geological Society based in London. Dave Francis, people pay £10 a year if they're working, and £5 if they're unwaged, and that renews annually, and he keeps the database. And we've also a database here of 1,400 folk that I send out the geopoetics news to every whenever there's a big event coming up. So people get a mailing from me with latest news that relates to, it can be somebody's book which comes out, or it can be some event not necessarily organised by ourselves. So that way we promote similar organisations and activities that are related to the creative expression of the earth, which is a short definition of geopoetics.
And wonderful to hear how that work and that network's really enriching and building up. It's very exciting, Norrie. Great stuff. Kirsty, you have a question. Kirsty McNabb, would you like to ask that? Just trying to find you on my screen.
Oh, I'm here. It was just a question from Rhona and Alice. You spoke very nicely about what you've learned through the conversations with the different communities and people from different backgrounds. And I just wondered if you had any immediate plans for using those lessons to move forward with another stage of your project.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, as well, Alice kind of mentioned at the end there that we're currently working on putting together a simple website, and one of the well, a couple of the features that will be on there is that we're going to share some of the questions that we've gathered from ourselves and other people who've been participating, and also a shared resources list as well. So that's a kind of first step, I suppose, in sharing some of the thinking and some of the things that we've found useful. Another element that we're going to include on the website, and that we've also included in the most recent gathering that we had, was we shared 4 Gaelic terms, Gaelic kind of sort of concepts that are kind of important in Gaelic worldview, and that will be familiar to some people and maybe less familiar to others, but that we've found useful in terms of the sort of methodologies that we've been using. So we're trying to find ways to kind of talk about them and make them hopefully part of some sort of useful toolkit for other people to have similar conversations, I suppose. So that's one thing that springs to mind. Alice, I don't know if you want to chip in with anything else.
Maybe, yeah, and something we touched on again in the talk, the work we're doing with the community trust. I think a lot of what we've learned working together is been about how to talk about some of these subjects, you know, the words to use. I mean, there've been plenty of times when people have asked me what my residency project's about, and I've shared it, and I have to say it's been a complete conversation stopper. And I've had to go back and think, okay, what am I saying that is killing this conversation, because no one really seems to want to talk about it. And so, you know, you try out, it's given us this opportunity to try out different ways of voicing it and different ways of, you know, what you say and what you don't say, what terms you use. And I think that's been one of a big learning. So then when you're then talking to, for example, a community trust about it, you kind of have a bit more confidence about how to voice it, how not to sort of stop the conversation. And I think also one of the key findings, I think, was been numbers. So the importance of numbers, like as Rhona was saying, often people of Gaelic heritage find themselves in meetings in the minority, particularly on Mull. And so we've been very careful in our work with the trust to make sure that that isn't the case. And it means it's slow work, because you have to build the relationships to bring people in and make sure people can actually get to the event or the meeting. But yeah, that's just an example, I suppose, of how putting into practice what we've learned in this residency, how you put it into practice then working on other projects with other people.
Jack, have you got your hand up?
So I was just wondering, Alice, if it had informed you of any particular kind of practices or types of art forms that, you know, has it presented you with solutions for the future like that think, oh, maybe we should, you know, use music, or, you know, or use a particular type of craft or art form to kind of continue on a path or a route with communities?
I think, I don't have to say art form, I'd say cultural. I mean, obviously the art form depends also on the project, but I'd say cultural form, and this is something that Rhona can speak to sort of better than I, but the gatherings, and we've talked about them as gatherings, they were loose, sort of based on the Gaelic format, so it was very much about a mixture of conversation, stories, song, food, baking, which was a culturally comfortable space for people, and a space that obviously people felt very at home in and was familiar. So that's a form, I don't know if it would be traditionally called an art form. I mean, I see it as a cultural form, and I think with socially engaged practice, any form, I mean, you can use anything. It can be letter writing, food, a walk, anything from life. And I think as well, we similarly with the house calls, you know, we decided, you know, we had discussions about, can we spend this much time doing house calls? But actually that was the form that was appropriate in that moment, that conversation one-on-one. I don't know, thinking about whether sort of, I guess things that come to mind, Jack, are things like live events, again, so walks or collective walks, which could be seen as dance, I suppose, or movement through a landscape, or gatherings around. It is so specific to the context, it's difficult to say a particular form. I don't know if Rhona, would you say anything to that?
No, I think you've sort of articulated that pretty well. We did, I suppose, in terms of art form, we haven't, like, music is the most obvious thing that we've included, and that we've had song. We used, you know, because we were initially talking a lot around trees and Mull, we sang some songs that from Gaelic songs from Mull, which have a lot of tree imagery, as most Mull songs do, which speaks to kind of the sort of forested, you know, nature of the island, less forested today, other than in a commercial way, I suppose. But yeah, it's more, rather than art form, it's more cultural practices and ways of meeting, talking, communicating, relating to people, which are kind of rooted in something more local and more traditional and more person-centered, perhaps, than sometimes a more, you know, bigger organizational, institutional things, which have certain ways of working, which is more about getting big numbers of people to attend things. And you know, I'm thinking of, you know, local council consultations and things like that, you know, that have a form that they work to, which don't necessarily doesn't necessarily work for people's real lives. So I suppose in our context, we're looking at it through this lens towards people of Gaelic heritage and the Gaelic culture in Mull. But equally, it's kind of, I suppose it's part of a bigger way that people can look at just, you know, more kind of place and person-centered ways of working.
Fascinating. I can see a couple more questions in the chat, and I'm also aware that Roxanne Permar is in the group, and I know Kirsten would like to ask a question about how working in islands has shaped practice, and it might be it's lovely to welcome Roxanne and the team from University of Highlands and Islands from the MA Art and Social Practice course. And so I'm preambling in order to ask you to consider to contribute to, I think, Kirsten's question about how working in islands has shaped the artist practice. So let me hand over to Kirsten. It's your question, Kirsten.
Yeah, I was just curious, being somebody that kind of works in different areas of Scotland and engaging with different landscapes, if you found just throughout working in this residency on the islands, if there was a different aspect of your work that is brought out, or something that you noticed in your practice or that changed in your practice due to working on the islands, opposed to maybe previous projects or work that you might have done beforehand on the mainland or in different areas of the world? I know it's quite a broad question, yeah, but it's curious just about how people's landscape can change aspects of your practice.
I guess our project was very much responding to our landscape and to our island. So, you know, that was one of the elements. But one of the things that I think was interesting was we're very much used to working in our island context, like how we reach people, and it is very much word of mouth or going through the school or going through key people, and a lot of it will be verbal or on maybe on Facebook, or whereas, you know, other ways that you would normally go about trying to engage an audience with a project, you know, you've only got this group that's here on this island really, and you know, maybe some people might travel over for the weekend, but it's a long way to come. You know, it tends to just be focused on that communicating. So we're used to that, but I think that was something that maybe, like, you know, that was something that maybe wasn't, you know, that, yeah, we're kind of used to that, but it would be different than if you were working on the mainland.
I was just going to say that for us, and from my personal point of view, I've worked a lot on the mainland in North Argyll, and it's, you know, very, very, very similar. in terms of the a lot of the kind of things that we were exploring. So the difference for me, I suppose, working with Alice and Mull was maybe just a bit more pronounced in terms of the demographics. But having said that, there are places in the mainland that have a very similar demographic as well. So for me, it's been more the nature of the things we're looking at are not really specific to Mull. And we kind of touched on it when we spoke, that there's sort of patterns across the whole of the Highlands and Islands, really, I would say. And we happen to be working in Mull, but we could have been working in a lot of different places and finding very similar things and exploring very similar issues. So yeah, that's, I don't know if how useful that is, but that's yeah, that's my own feeling. Obviously, every community has its own specific dynamics, but for me, the things we're exploring are more regional than they are specific to Mull.
You can see, Dan, you're nodding your head. Would you like to come in at that point?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks. And firstly, thanks to everybody for your presentations. It's been really, really, really interesting. And I'm here with other colleagues and students from our MA course, Art and Social Practice. We're in our winter school in Inverness, and the weather has certainly done us proud in terms of being wintry, and a lot of people haven't made it. So we've done a little bit more online than we thought we would. So we're really glad to be joining in today. I was nodding because I feel that a lot of what I do and what we do within our course and the university and as individual practitioners is not necessarily specific to an island or a community. Sometimes what we're doing has a lot of not only regional commonality, but also national and international commonality with different nuanced in different ways. And I also, Shetland is part of the Scottish Islands, but we're also an archipelago. So we have many different islands and different island communities. So I'm aware from having worked with some of the folk on our course that the island, I live on an island that's about 800 people. Others, Tiree, I'm conscious of being much smaller than that. And so
Tiree, it's not so different. It's about 700.
Is it? Okay, I thought it was smaller than that. Maybe it's Jura. We've had students from Jura as well. That's much smaller. But I think, personally, I feel that the way I practice as an artist, having also lived in cities, worked in cities, there's ways, there's things that we should do as practitioners that are good practice. And whether you're in a small community or a big urban metropolis, it shouldn't matter. But in a small community, like where I live in Shetland, it's much more noticeable, and you probably won't get work again if you don't practice well and sensitively in response to the community. I've probably not answered the question. Anyway,
there's no second chances on your island.
That's right. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
I would just to follow up on that idea, like I often say that I think like Tiree is you're very exposed in terms of landscape, and you're very exposed in terms of who you are as a person, and that's obviously got positives and negatives. So yeah, I think you're right with that in some ways.
Can I say that Ling is much smaller population than 800? We have 175 residents in Ling, and but I've been living on Ling for 16 years now, and I think I've eventually got to grips with the Ling way of doing things, which is, I'm sure other islanders say, oh, this is the way we do things here. I mean, Kerala is much smaller, I think about 60 residents in population-wise. So I found the biggest difference actually in responses and willingness to come to workshops was not between one island and the other, but actually between the crafters and artists and the writers. Lottie's workshops were almost all full every time. They were quickly filled up. And part of the reason for that, I think, is that the we had a group of crafters already online who were meeting socially every week in the Atlantic Island Centre here, which is a community project. And I think that that meant that they knew what they were coming for. They signed up right away, whereas the writers were a much more difficult crowd to get together. And I think that's also maybe a general, it's not peculiar to islands that either. I think that's just that, I don't know what, writers tend to be more independent and they don't necessarily want to go to classes about writing or whatever. So that was my experience, and I don't know how common that would be. Say filmmakers, I mean, Jack, did you get many? Could you tell us a wee bit more about your film? You know, how long is it going to be? When's it coming out? And what sort of, did you get many other filmmakers coming along to the workshops you organised?
Can I ask us just to hold that thought for a second, because I know that Rachel and others have their hand up, I think, relating to working in island context. So just, and I think that's a great question, Nori, but just before we branch off, can I check?
Yeah, sorry, Kerry, I can't see Kerry now on the
I'm here.
the gallery, but Kerry and Rachel, who I
Hello, Mary.
spotlighted there, just because I know, yeah, it's a landscape-based project, the Connecting Threads and the Borders River Tweed, that I know well, and I just thought it would be interesting to get their perspective. And yeah, apologies, I know you've had your hands up for a while, so I'm not sure. Kerry and then Rachel, or
do you want to go, Kerry?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was just going to say that I think there's a lot of similarities between, you know, the projects that you described and working on islands. Well, you know, like water is this surrounding entity to where you are, and our project works with the River Tweed from source to sea, which runs nearly 100 miles from Moffat down to the sea at North Northumberland. So for us, it's like water is a flowing river, obviously, and it goes from a small damp patch in a field to a massive open sea. So it has these many diverse changes and rhythms and communities that live among it. So it seems very similar in some ways to the communities that you've all been engaging with, that have their diversity and language and dialects and traditions and crafts. And I think that's something that we're really trying to do, which is very similar to what I think Alice was talking about, which is kind of really taking that idea of the idea of Gaelic and this idea of gatherings, you know, and what that really means to people, and how, like, you know, if you're presenting something that is an art context, that perhaps if you bring in food and talk and music and other elements into those happenings, that this is, you know, can really break down boundaries and barriers to making work. But yes, I mean, for us, the river is a spine and it's a flowing movement. So in that respect, perhaps it's slightly different to the sea and the tides, but it's still this idea of what that represents to us. So I think it's been really interesting hearing about your projects. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, can I just add to that? I'm a colleague of Kerry's, also working on Connecting Threads, and I've found all these three presentations really fascinating. So thank you very much indeed. And like Kerry, I'm quite fascinated actually by the comparisons and the differences, because we are a river, and we're a river that's in a very landlocked part of Scotland. So it's really in some ways very different to these island-based projects. but I think we have an awful lot in common as well. But one of the things that's in common that I found particularly interesting was hearing Rhona and Alice talking about Gaelic culture and language. And I suppose I'm thinking about in the Borders, we have talked a little bit already within our team about language and Border Scots, for instance, and how language changes as you go from the source of the river down to the mouth of the river down which is in Berwick, which is you're in England by then, and you're on the Scottish-English border at some points of the river. So for us, language is also really important, and I think it's in a very, very different place to what's happening in the Gaeltacht, but I think there are maybe some useful lessons there that we could learn. I think there are probably a lot of hidden stories and hidden aspects of the Tweed that are embedded in Scots Borders language that we might not necessarily access unless we think carefully about how to engage with people. So I'm looking forward to these resources that you're talking about and these questions that we might be able to apply when we're working with our communities. Our project is also very person-centred, so I think we could learn a lot from the work you've been doing. So thank you very much. I hope I've not talked too long, but thank you. It's been really helpful listening to your stories tonight.
Thank you, Rachel. It's really lovely to get that feedback and hear that that this is useful for you. Can I ask you to consider proposing your final questions? There are one or two points I think we just want to check. Nina Pope, you have a question. Could I pass over to you?
Sorry, I just put it in the chat and aware that we might have run out of time. It was really just reflecting on having a physical building. I found myself thinking about it because of Jack talking about the Heinisch Centre and that kind of chance making a big difference to their project, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's for us. It's just something that just sort of happened, you know what I mean? But it feels like that it brings along with it sort of sense of being more established as part of the community and what we're offering. I suppose we've been doing similar work here for the past 8 years, but we suddenly have, and we've been doing pop-up stuff all the time over the last 8 years, but then this space happened and it feels like it's a kind of a change. It's like it's sort of things crystallized to a point where it's like perhaps we're more established. What we're offering is more part of the fabric of the island.
It was really lovely. I mean, Heinisch is such a magical place, and it was so brilliant to be able to respond to that. Well, you know, Nina, it's just got such a great atmosphere to it. So that was really fantastic. And it was really exciting. It was so brilliant not having to put the cinema kit up and down every time and all the chairs and everything. And I think, but then there is issues that it is a long way, you know, it is right down the West End. It's a long, dark road at night. And also like politically, like on Tyree, one of the brilliant things, well, in some ways, like I always say, like it's so brilliant using our community hall for stuff because everybody uses the community hall. There's no barriers to using that community hall generally, but then there is still politics. So I think we're at, in some ways, like it's really amazing to have our own space, and I think that's really lovely to be able to have the nets and build up those kind of comments and people to feel like that's a space they can come to and kind of to build that. But I also think there's a real important to keep mixing it about because we also do screenings at the airport, we've done them at the Lodge Hotel, and you get different audiences for all these different places, you know, that maybe wouldn't come to the other. So I think it's a mix.
Yeah, and it's always political.
It's always political, yeah.
I'm not sure what the politics of village halls is in Tyree, but it's not a big issue on Ling, as far as I know. We just rented the village halls mostly for our workshops. However, the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics, which is next door to my cottage, it is really going to be a space for going into some depth into geopoetics and into writing and making films and so forth. It's an artwork. I think it's really a resource and research centre where writers and others can come to undertake more, deeper work on what geopoetics is all about. So I think it's a great asset to have for that purpose. But beyond that, other events I think can take place in whichever local venue is feasible and is available.
Yeah,
I think what the benefit of using the community hall is because it wasn't, because it is everyone's space, so it's less political. But now that we're kind of getting our own space, you're getting more into those issues that Alice and Rhona are exploring, where it's like, who is this person creating a space, and how does that link up with the cultures of Tiree? Is it part of Tiree, or is it a tourist attraction, or is it a threat, or it's where wish us luck. And hopefully you can all come and join in.
I'll just add one more point that came up in the previous discussion, that I think it would be good if charts sort of looked at the question of a strategy to support existing active cultural groups or cultural activists, rather than solely applying for one project after another. I think there is a case there for, and it doesn't necessarily require a building, but there are groups of people who are clearly active and have been putting in volunteer labour for many, many years. And that is the basis on which a lot of these projects have been successful, because the folk involved know that folk have put in the groundwork. But I think beyond this project, it would be helpful if Chart's steering group, for example, had a discussion about how to sort of sustain the cultural activity that's going on in the various, not just the islands, but in different communities across Argyll and Bute.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Nori. Please never hesitate to make suggestions to us. That is really the essence of what this initiative is about. It's about trying to dig deep, trying to gain understanding so that Charts can make a stronger case of support for the work that's been done. But we equally, when you say it out loud like that, could Charts please do such and such, that's incredibly helpful. So that aspect, the ongoing challenge of durational practices, of finding resources to enable artist practitioners to carry out their practice over sustained periods of time, is something that I think is to say close to our hearts. It's the underlying aim all the way. Mary's making a comment on that, and I'd like to just ask Kathleen O'Neill, who is the CEO for Charts, to come in. And Kathleen, can you share your thoughts on this subject with us?
Yes, I would, Nori, and thank you everyone for these fantastic presentations and the discussion that's emerging. And I will be in touch with you all after this presentation, because first of all, I think it's really important that in your closing reports to the project managers, you do actually tell Charts a few things. First of all, as you've mentioned today, what your ambitions would be beyond the project, what you feel is important to your island or networks of island or people, and the new contacts you've made. And most of all, to remember that Charts is a member-guided organisation, that a steering group does exist. We have steering group members on the islands who should be contacted. Jen Skinner is our key representative. We are recruiting more steering group members for islands. And I think in the 5 years that I've been with Charts since it's existed, what surprises me more than anything continually is the lack of engagement from members around their needs and what we should be fundraising for. So to answer Nori's point, I do come to another place now, which is to also remember that Charts, the organisation that was designed and it was researched, and it was evidenced, the need for it was evidenced by our membership, and our membership is growing massively now. It is in itself a project. It's an annually funded charity. So while with the best intentions, we would love to be in a position to make long-term plans, we can but exist with a strategy that we try and build and we knit together organically, building on the responses of our members. So to help us grow stronger and help the organisation that the culture sector sought to have represent Argyll and Bute, we must hear your voices. We operate with a really small staff team. We have very, very few employees. Our project managers are all freelance on short-term contracts, and we work with a collaborative management style. So we're all regularly in touch. And I've gleaned some really important points from the reports that the project managers have sent me about your work. I've picked up on a few things during this presentation that I would like to hear more about and to have closer links to. But I think, in a sense, to end this, or my speaking here, on a very optimistic note, the ball is in your court. As members, if you come back to us, come back to your steering group, who will meet with staff and inform staff on need, and know that we can be contacted directly, I can be contacted directly, then that is the way forward. And in a sense, the team who work with you to create these opportunities and to have these opportunities resourced and funded are in exactly the same cultural position as yourself. And that is political, I suppose, that the politics of culture. So we sit there with you and for you. And as we grow stronger, we hope to make longer term plans. On that note, I should also say that our new business plan will be published in April. And at this stage in the cultural climate, we are looking at a 3-year business plan from 2025 to 2028. So if you'd like to feed back to us also when you see that launched in April. Jen, as our steering group representative for Islands, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I was gonna just say, so like last year, we had an initial rollout of because one of the things that I'd found most beneficial from the island projects that as it is developed with charts separate to this specific one was the chance to bring people who are working across, because often it's quite disparate on an island and you don't see each other, and the chance, so we had Mary come over to talk to a group of us, and charts funded the tea and cake and the hall, and then so from that, we started a pilot last year where there's 2 groups that now meeting on Mull regularly and 1 on Bute. And we're hoping to build on that, aren't we, Kathleen, across the islands? And I think like by trying to have like a monthly get together or like every couple of months where you're kind of bringing people working in creative culture and heritage sectors together and a chance to share ideas, things like you're discussing, Nori, then people can work together or find opportunities or share opportunities or feedback, things that they'd like to see. So I think it's that, like people said, that chance to connect and communicate like is just so important. And it's often so hard as well, because especially in the nature of our work, we're project to project, all of us probably freelance project to project, and you forget to catch up or you want to carry that thing on and you don't get quite chance. But whereas if there's like that format of a meeting, and you bring everyone together and have a cup of tea, then and some cake, then that's a really good chance to kind of build and strengthen that connections.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jen and Kathleen, for that. Well, I think we're going to move towards closing the event. In a minute, I'm going to hand back over to Kirsten and Mary. But I just wanted to share my thoughts and some of the ones that are kind of going through my head, and some of the things that we haven't investigated but have been raised. ideas of indigenous, indigeneity, and I'm kind of wondering if that's seen as a fixed thing or a fluid thing, and how interesting it would be to organise a forum to explore that further. And I think absolutely running through every conversation that I ever have in my wonderful work with charts is the issue of language, the nuances of different languages, of heritage languages, of evolving languages, the range of mother tongue speakers, new speakers, but also the language of kind of comfort when negotiating, working with other people. I thought it was wonderful to hear somebody say, I'm sorry if I didn't pick up who it was, about working in venues and how the practitioners are actually the hosts. And I think one of the things that's come out today is this absolute common commitment to all the practitioners acting as hosts and creating spaces for exchange. And doing so, I think having to negotiate, I think another thing that we really need to think about is how these hosts are negotiating the value of their services, often given for free, often taken for granted, sometimes misunderstood, but the patience involved in constantly encouraging people to understand the value of the role and the role in the communities in encouraging agency. So that lifelong work of building the reputation, the integrity through trust with people in the community. So thank you very much from me to the speakers, but also to everybody who's contributed to this last part, which I think has really, really enriched my thinking about working in Argyll and the islands.
So I mean, at the risk of repeating it, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to the project artists in particular for the presentations. I mean, it's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the thinking and the commitment and the work that you've been doing. And there's legs to it all. And there is a legacy, and as Kathleen said, we're listening and we're paying attention, and definitely look to how that could be supportive going forwards. You know, there's things that are coming out that are so valuable. Like I said early on, it's that continuum, it's that investment, and the groundwork has been laid beautifully. And thank you to Deirdre for facilitating and managing all the different kind of strands of the discussion and the presentations, to Kirsten, as always, for the smooth and friendly running beyond just tech, of course, in the background, and to Kathleen, and that was brilliant, to hear directly from Kathleen there, and to the wider board and steering group of Charts for their continuing commitment to developing these sorts of opportunities and commissions. And it's an absolute privilege to be part of this. I as I said at the beginning, thank you to the funders, Great Scotland, Scottish Government, Argyll and Bute Council and Bòrd na Gaelic, and to all of you for engaging with us today. And please, follow up with any thoughts that might occur beyond just now. So you can email Kirsten or Deirdre and I on, we can connect you also with the projects that if necessary. And if you'd like to join Charts as a member, Kirsten is the person to contact, and you don't have to be based in the area to be a member, as my understanding. It's about supporting and connecting with the work in that wider way. So do get involved. So thank you.